Hey kiddos, so this is the last lesson on solving quadratics, and these are going to be irrational solutions as well, but it's one step further. So this video is actually extra credit for watching it, and then the assignment that goes with it will also be extra credit. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's say that the quadratic that we begin with is this, negative 5p squared plus, let's see, 8p subtract 8 equals negative 6p squared. Okay, remember you have to have the equation set equal to 0. So we know that, so we need to add 6p squared to both sides. So when I do that, I end up with p squared plus 8p minus 8 equals 0. Okay, and so you could try to factor it. So you would find factors of negative 8 that have a sum of positive 8, and you're not going to find any. Okay, so this one is not factorable. The quadratic formula will work for everything though. So let's go ahead and write what the quadratic formula is. Instead of using x, in this case, we're solving for p. It's equal to negative parentheses b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So then the next step, oh, I forgot to identify a, b, and c. Let's do that. So a is equal to 1, b is equal to 8, and c is equal to negative 8. So this first step then, let's go ahead and substitute only. Let's not do any simplification yet. So p is going to be equal to negative, parentheses 8, plus or minus, let's see, 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 8, all over 2 times 1. Okay, all you do, the first step is just to substitute in. And you could be using the template still if you wanted to, from the files on Teams that has the, like sort of the fill in the blank quadratic formula. You would be, on quizzes and tests, you would be expected to have memorized the quadratic formula, so I would work on that if I were you. Okay, so the next step, let's start our simplification process. So p is equal to negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 64, because 8 squared is 64. Okay, then I'm going to do this. So negative 4 times 1 first. That is negative 4. So I'm done with those guys. So then I do that product of negative 4 times negative 8, and I get 32, positive. So plus 32. All over 2 times 1 is 2. All right. So then I'll go with gray for the next step. So this is p is equal to negative 8 plus or minus. Let's see here. So 64 plus 32 is a 96. All over 2. Okay. Perfect. So I'm going to rewrite that actually in the middle here. Negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 96 all over 2. Okay, and so just like in lesson 2, this is lesson 3. So just like in lesson 2, I'm kind of make another column over here. We need to look at, oh, we have more colors? No. We need, silly goose, we need to look at the square root of 96. Okay, we need to figure out if there are any perfect square factors in 96. So you can get out a calculator if you wanted to. And let's think of some perfect squares. So we know 4 is a perfect square, right? So let's see if 96 is divisible by 4. Okay, it is. It's 24. Okay, but 24 also has a factor of 4 in it. So let's try 16. So 19 divided by 16. Let's see what we get there. We get 6. Okay, so the square root of 96 is the same thing as the square root of 16 times the square root of 6. Okay, well, we know that the square root of 16 is plus or minus 4, and the square root of 6 cannot be simplified. So square root of 96 simplified is 4 plus or minus 4 times the square root of 6. So I'm going to be inserting that in the place of the square root of 96 and our answer. So I'm going to bring this over here. So everything else stays the same. So I use my -8, so -8, and then this yellow piece, remember, is going to become this, plus or minus 4 times the square root of 6 all over 2. Okay, that's simple enough, but this next part is where it can get a little bit confusing. Okay, so let's look solely at this top expression, the numerator expression. Okay, -8 plus or minus 4 times the square root of 6. And you can even look at the square root of 6 like a variable. Okay, it's like 4 times something. Okay, so -8 plus or minus 4 times something. So you want to look for common factors here. Okay, so you're looking at -8 and 4. Well, the common factor there is 4. Okay, so we're going to be factoring out a 4 out of the numerator. So this will become, I'm going to actually write it down below, 4 times -2 plus or minus the square root of 6 all over 2. You can see that the two aqua expressions here are equivalent, right? I just factored out a 4. But now you can also see, I'm going to highlight these in purple, that 4 and 2 have a common factor of 2. So let me rewrite this so it's not so messy. So I have right now 4 times the quantity -2 plus or minus the square root of 6. This is all divided by 2. If I were to divide top and bottom by 2, this goes away, this becomes a 2. So then my final answer is going to be 2 parentheses -2 plus or minus the square root of 6, which you could go ahead and multiply it back out. Okay, you could say, well, that's -4 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 6. Okay, these two are equivalent to each other. Okay, so this would be your final answer. Actually, this one would probably be the preferred way. All right, let's do another one. These are a little bit more complex, and that's why this is extra credit. It definitely would have been a requirement if we were still in class together, but we're not, so we're going to make this extra credit. This will definitely come in handy when you're in Algebra 2. Okay, all right, so let's look at another one that's kind of similar to that. So it's 4d squared minus 4d subtract 13 equals 3d squared. Okay, we have to set it equal to 0. We're going to subtract the 3d squared from both sides. So I'm going to get d squared minus 4d minus 13 equals 0. And you always, for me, I always try to factor first. So I think of factors of -13, which it's prime, so it's just going to be -13 and 1, and vice versa. That's not going to have a sum of -4. It's not factorable. So I'm going to identify the a, the b, and the c. So a is 1, b is -4, and c is -13. I'm going to write the quadratic formula. We're solving for d this time. So d is going to be equal to -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. Okay, and then I'm just going to plug in for this first one. So d is going to be equal to parentheses -4. So you're going to see how that's going to become a positive, but don't do it yet. Go ahead and just substitute only, and then we'll go back and simplify. Plus or minus the square root of -4 squared minus 4 times 1 times -13 all over 2 times 1. Okay. Alrighty, so I'm going to go with green now, showing the next step, simplification now. So negative negative 4, that's just 4, plus or minus the square root of 16, because negative 4 times itself is 16. And then it's going to be, I'm going to be working on this expression. So negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. And so then negative 4 times negative 13 is 52. 2 carry 1, yeah, 52. So plus 52 all over 2. Okay. I'm going to go with gray for the next step. So 4 plus or minus the square root of 78. Nope, just kidding, 68. So let's try to just undo. Darn it. Let's undo. There we go. Okay. 68 all over 2. Okay. So I'm going to rewrite that guy. Go down just a little bit. So I have 4 plus or minus the square root of 68, the whole thing divided by 2. I'm going to make another column over here. Okay. I'm going to be kind of looking into the square root of 68. I'm going to be seeing if it can simplify at all. So I think of perfect squares, okay? So I'm going to try 4 first. So 68 divided by 4, I did multiplication. That's not right. 68 divided by 4 is 17. Okay? 68 divided by 4 is 17, and 17 is prime. So this, the square root of 68, is the same thing as the square root of 4 times the square root of 17. Same thing. Okay, well then we know what the square root of 4 is. We know that that is plus or minus 2. Now it's times, and when it's written next to it, it's just like a variable. It means multiplication. So the square root of 68 is equivalent to, and it's in simplified form, is plus or minus 2 times the square root of 17. So we're going to be inserting that for the square root of 68 in the solution that we just came up with for this quadratic. So I'm going to use a different color. So it's going to be 4 plus or minus, again inserting that here, 2 times the square root of 17 all over 2. Okay, but again we need to look at that top expression, so the expression that is in the numerator. So let's look at that. So the aqua part. Okay, 4 plus or minus 2 times something. This is the square root of 17, but if it helps to think of it as a variable, you can think of it that way. Factoring out the greatest common factor. Well, 4 and 2 definitely have a factor of 2, right? So I'm going to rewrite that expression as 2 parentheses 2 plus the square root of 17. And then don't forget to write the denominator, 2. And you can see that the two aqua expressions are equivalent. All right, now that it has been factored out, let's rewrite. So now I have 2 times quantity 2 plus or minus, should be minus, the square root of 17 all over 2. You can see that you can divide top and bottom by 2. And you're left with 2 plus or minus the square root of 17, and that is your final answer. 2 plus or minus the square root of 17. That will be an exact answer. If you're asked for a decimal answer or an approximation, you can just plug in 2 plus the square root of 17 into Desmos. It will give you one of the answers. Then you'll do the same thing for 2 minus the square root of 17, and that would give you the other answer. All right, let's do one more. I mean, if you feel comfortable at this point to do the extra credit work, you can certainly do that. That's fine. All right. So let's start another one. Let's start it here. Okay. Last one. So this one is for the variable k. So 5k squared plus 14k plus 1 equals 4k. So I'll subtract the 4k on both sides. So 5k squared plus 10k plus 1 is 0. Identify your a, b, and c. So a is 5, b is 10. They're all positives this time, huh? C is 1. We're solving for k, so the quadratic formula was going to be k is equal to negative parentheses b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, next step is simply substituting in. So negative parentheses 10 plus or minus the square root of 10 squared minus 4 times 5 times 1 all over 2 times 5. Something different than 2 in the bottom, huh? Okay, so now I have substituted, so now I can start simplification. So k is going to be equal to negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 100, because 10 squared is 100. It's going to be minus 20, because negative 5 times 4 is negative 20. Negative 20 times 1 is negative 20. All over 10. Simplify step again. So negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 80 all over 10. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite what we just got. So negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 80 all over 10. All right, so we're looking at the square root of 80 right now. That's what we're looking at. Okay, so we definitely could do the square root of 4 and the square root of 20, right? But that's also the square root of 4 and the square root of 5. So square root of 80 could be broken down to the square root of 16 and the square root of 5, right? If we didn't see that and we did it this way, I would get square root of 4 is 2, square root of 4 is 2 times square root of 5, which would be plus or minus 4 times the square root of 5, which you'll see I get the same thing here. Square root of 16 is plus or minus 4 times the square root of 5. So you can see the square root of 80 is equivalent to plus or minus 4 times the square root of 5. So I'll be substituting that in over here. So I get negative 10 plus or minus 4 times the square root of 5 all over 10. Okay, so let's space down a bit. There we go. So there we go. Let's choose blue for Buckeye. All right, so now I'm looking at this top expression, and I'm looking for the greatest common factor. Negative 10 plus or minus 4 times something. Okay, so I know 2 is common there, so 2 times negative 5 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 5 all over 10. Okay, if I divide top and bottom by 2, this goes away, becomes 1, this becomes 5. So then, my finished product is all that I have highlighted in green here. So, my finished product is, or finished answer is, negative 5 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 5 all over 5. Final answer. Okay, and so I'll assign some here, and this will be extra credit for you should you decide to do it. Thanks, guys.